Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any point. And I want to say good morning to everybody and welcome all of our witnesses for being here today. I look forward to hearing or having a very productive discussion about the various motor carrier issues facing the industry. And I'm very happy to welcome Administrator Ray Martinez to the committee for the first time. I know all members on both sides are very interested to hear from Mr. Martinez on a number of issues that are before the agency. As many of you know, Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, or FAST Act, was the first long-term surface transportation reauthorization bill in a decade and included a number of reforms to laws governing the safety and oversight of commercial motor vehicles. Specifically, the FAST Act increased funding for and consolidated motor carrier grant programs and streamlined programs to reduce administrative costs and regulatory burdens on the states. Something I'm very proud of was that important to the number of committee members was that the FAST Act reformed compliance, it reformed safety, and accountability programs, CSA program. We heard loud and clear the concerns from the industry, the Government Accountability Office, and the DOT Inspector General. And the committee is going to continue to look closely and monitor closely these reforms as FMCSA implements them. In addition, the FAST Act reformed the regulatory process by requiring FMCSA to use the best available science and data on various segments of the motor carrier industry when developing rulemakings and establishing a process under which the public or the industry can petition FMCSA to revise or repeal regulations if they are no longer current or consistent or uniformly enforced. Finally, the FAST Act provided opportunities to veterans by easing the process for individuals who are currently serving in either the armed services or reserve components to find employment in the trucking industry, and it also established a pilot program for veterans and reserve members younger than 21 years of age who received training during their service in the military to drive certain commercial motor vehicles and interstate commerce. Our witnesses are going to offer their feedback on the implementation of various motor carrier provisions of the FAST Act, as well as a number of other issues that are facing the industry today. And I want to thank you again for all of you for appearing today. I know it takes time out of your schedules to be here, and we look forward to hearing your testimony. With that, I'll turn to Ms. Norton for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graves. I very much appreciate this hearing, especially at this time when we have a new administrator. Administrator Martinez, whom I'm pleased to welcome. I particularly appreciate this hearing as well, Mr. Chairman, because in June of 2017, I wrote and requested a hearing because of the upcoming release. It hadn't yet been released, but there was considerable interest in the release of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's study of the FMCSAs compliance and safety program. So I think that what you're doing today is certainly in keeping with what my concerns have been, and clearly your calling this hearing today shows that you, Mr. Chairman, have the same concerns, and I appreciate your using this hearing now that we have a new administrator for us to assess where we are on the very vexing issue of increase in the number of people who lose their lives because of truck accident. Usually we're able to do something in our country when we see things going up, and then we gradually take action and the problem begins to decrease. But there has been an almost 30% increase in the number of fatal truck and bus crashes in the last almost 10 years, since 2009. With the new administrator, with these figures showing no movement, this hearing is especially timely so that we can understand where we are and can move forward more rapidly. The major concern I have, Mr. Chairman, is with the safety fitness determination rule. The agency has been working on this rule for more than a decade. in order to get a better system to track the safety record of motor carriers. So I understand the difficulty of the issue, but the time span becomes unacceptable in light of what we're seeing with the increase in truck and bus fatalities. I was pleased to note that 85% of carriers do have a safety rating, but if you look more closely at these figures, it shows that 40% of the ratings are more than a decade old, which means that they are probably not a good indicator of the carrier's current level of safety. So we are really behind even where we have been doing better. To the credit of the trucking industry, that industry has asked for years for a bright line safety test that would be developed by the agency. That effort, of course, is currently underway at the FMCSA to evaluate its underlying data and analysis model, to look at its algorithms, but that's what you've been doing, or that's what the agency has been doing for 10 years. I say time up, and that the time has come for ensuring that the agency responsible for ensuring truck and bus safety actually issues safety ratings. I have long advocated a more robust commercial truck and driver training for more commercial truck and bus training. There seemed to have been agreement, but I was disappointed that we did not get exactly what I wanted in the FAST Act. Congress first directed the Department of Transportation to develop training standards for commercial motor vehicles a quarter of a century ago. In 2016, the FMCSA did issue a new rule based on recommendations of negotiated rulemaking. Now, negotiated rulemaking is a very good way to proceed. However, the agency failed to advance a critical recommendation that proceeded from that rulemaking to require a minimum number of hours behind the wheel training. Mr. Chairman, this is graduation season. In order to graduate from college or high school, you have to have a number of hours. That's how we know whether you are educated in the subject, whether you are trained. I don't see how we can fail to require the same for people who get behind the wheel in the biggest vehicles on the road. I want to commend Administrator Martinez for his efforts, the efforts of the agency in implementing the electronic logging device. We call it ELD. That mandate that Congress did pass in MAP 21, the bill before the FAST Act. Particularly note that you yourself, Mr. Martinez, mentioned the ELDs and called them life-saving technology. I believe that the committee entirely agrees with you. I am disturbed by claims that the ELDs are the cause of major disruptions in the trucking industry. Let's look at what they do. The requirement to move to electronic timekeeping does not make any change in the underlying duty rules. A driver is legally allowed to drive for the same amount of time, whether tracking hours electronically or on paper. The difference, of course, is in having an ELD means a driver must completely and fully comply with federal limits. I'm not sure, therefore, what the objection should be. I strongly support the ongoing dialogue. It's the way to proceed, in my judgment, among the U.S. DOT and Congress toward the collaboration that has moved us this far. I note that we do not have representatives from the American Trucking Association, the Owner-Operated Drivers Association, or labor, We do not have a shipper witness. I believe that complex motor carrier safety regulatory issues warrant robust discussion in Congress with all stakeholders, representative hearings where a wide swath of industry is left off the agenda amount to a missed opportunity. I ask unanimous consent to include in the hearing record submissions from stakeholders not able to sit at the witness test table for today's hearing. Could I have a consent for that, Mr. Chairman?
Without objection.
Finally, I would like again to extend, I would like at this time also to welcome Jennifer Tierney, who will be on the second panel, and other volunteers from the Truck Safety Coalition in the audience today. Thank you for this hearing.
I will now turn to Chairman of the full committee, Bill Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Administrator Martinez for being here. You've been, I guess, I figured about 3 months on the job, but I know you have vast experience in this industry, and so again, welcome. We're glad you're here today, as well as all the witnesses. One of the goals of the FAST Act was to provide motor carrier operators with some regulatory relief, and while also maintaining a very high level of safety. And I think we're moving significantly in that direction. So I appreciate what the folks are doing over at FMCS in making that progress. So again, looking to hear from you today, Administrator. But in addition, I also like to welcome one of our stakeholders that's going to testify, Mr. Dale Kraft from Pennsylvania, who operates motor coach and school buses throughout Pennsylvania. Welcome. It's glad to have you here, and your vast experience and knowledge about operating out there in the real world and having to deal with inside the Beltway and the things, the impediments we put up sometimes wrongly to do things and affect your business negatively. But I am looking forward to hearing from all our witnesses today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now turn to Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. Fazio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's certainly an important subject. I think that we could have had a more diverse panel representing trucking interests and people who work in the industry, but it is what it is. I thank Mr. Martinez for being here for, I think this is the first hearing we've had him, and he has a lot of challenges ahead. You know, we had 12 people die every day in large truck crashes in 2016. That's 4,371 deaths in 1 year. Now imagine if we had a fraction of that in aviation or some other critical public transportation sector. We need to deal with this. I mean, there's potentially technology in the future that'll help. I've seen the driver assist Uber truck, the Tesla truck, and others. They're not self-driving, but they can do driver assist, so there may be some technological fixes out there. But there are certainly other fixes which relate to training, as enumerated by the ranking member, to fatigue, which is an extraordinary problem, and other issues. And there's a few things pending that you know, I'm concerned about. I mean, first is we had a recent amendment on the FAA bill regarding exemptions from liability for brokers because there is no reliable data out there from FMCSA. I've raised concerns about the CSA with several administrators. We did put a mandate in the FAST Act that this be reviewed and corrective action be taken so that we can have meaningful and accurate safety data out there for anyone who wants to hire a company or a driver. And they can look and say, oh, I don't think I want to hire that one, but oh, this one, you know, AAA plus, great. So we need to get that done. The other issue there would be part of the reason for that exemption is because more and more litigation, they're looking for anybody somewhere who can pay the catastrophic costs of a large truck accident. You know, 1980, Congress set the level at $750,000 for insurance. Now, if we just peg that to CPI, it would be $2 million, except that the DOT itself says that it's more a relationship to medical costs, and so it should be more like $3 million, which would be indexed for medical costs since 1980. And again, for lack of that and a meaningful CSA score, we're having Congress attempt to push through liability exemptions and other things. We've got to get this stuff done. Then the other issue that causes, I think, a lot of problems in the industry is detention time. You know, if you study economics, there's something called an external diseconomy. I dump my waste out the back door into the river. Someone else has to clean it up. Someone else has to pay for it. That's an external diseconomy. I saved money. I dumped it out the back door. So we have some warehousers and others who are receiving goods or ports where the drivers have no predictability, and they're on the clock. And wow, I'm sitting here waiting to get on. Well, we don't care. So, sorry, you're going to sit there 5 hours. We're busy right now. We don't schedule you. We didn't make accommodation for you, except that they've got to move on to another delivery and make a living. So you know, they are often confronted with getting paid, moving goods by the load, or you know, not getting adequate rest, which could mean a violation of rest and duty time, which can lead to accidents. I asked for a study. We didn't get too much done because there's no reliable data. Another mandate of the bill was that, that your agency mandate a rule where truck drivers would report so we could put together a database. The other good thing about that would be if it became a public database, then you could actually have a market-based solution in part because drivers would say, I've never taken a load to that place. Everybody has to wait 5 hours. I'm not going there. And that could cause some corrective action on the part of some of these receivers of the freight. But the IG study did say, and this is just says 15-minute increase in average time at a load or unload facility increases the expected crash rate by 6.2%. Wow, that's an extraordinary thing that could be avoided with more efficiency in the system. But when someone who doesn't care to be efficient because it would cost them a little money, and they no longer get penalized like we used to do, say, wait a minute, if you make that driver sit there 2 hours, you're going to pay for their time. That was what detention time was. It went away with deregulation. So we've created some problems in the whole chain of delivery and the efficiency of the system that I think we need to deal with. I mean, people say, oh, we can't have any more rules. They all have unintended consequences. But there's also unintended consequences of totally repealing rules, as I've just described with the detention time problem and other things. So thoughtful rulemaking that does not unnecessarily impede the industry, but actually facilitates the improvement of the industry, could help us deal with the driver shortage, could help us deal with safety issues. I mean, there's a lot that could be done here beneficially, so I look forward to hearing from the administrator and the other witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, today we're going to have two panels of witnesses, and I want to again welcome the Honorable Ray Martinez, who's the Administrator of the Federal Motor Carriers Administration. And I would ask unanimous consent that his full statement be included in the record. And without objection, that is so ordered. And since your written testimony is going to be included as part of the record, the committee would request that you limit your testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, Mr. Martinez, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graves, Chairman Schuster, ranking members DeFazio and Norton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify about FMCSAs work. FMCSA's primary mission is to reduce crashes, injuries, and fatalities involving large trucks and buses. We regulate more than 500,000 interstate motor carriers and nearly 4.7 million active holders of commercial driver licenses. Our commercial motor carrier safety assistance program supports 13,000 state law enforcement partners who conduct 3.5 million commercial motor vehicle inspections each year. We thank Congress for the FAST Act changes that streamlined our grant programs and increased funding levels, providing critical resources so that our state enforcement partners and other grantees can carry out important safety work every day. We have seen much success, but much more remains to be done. Highway fatalities increased from 2015 to 2016 in all segments, including crashes involving large trucks and buses. So our work, Mr. Chairman, continues. Since beginning my tenure with FMCSA in February of this year, we have engaged with our industry and safety partners, working consistently to maintain the safest transportation system possible. One of the ways FMCSA is working towards these goals is helping industry transition to ELDs, to address hours of service compliance and driver fatigue. The ELD rule requires most drivers to use ELDs to record information about their hours of service. Full enforcement of the rule began April 1st of this year, and we are seeing some preliminary results. Of the nearly 300,000 driver inspections conducted since April 1st, less than 1% of drivers inspected have been cited for failing to have an ELD when they were required to have one. The FMCSA is also working to address the unique needs of the agricultural industry, and we've heard a lot from that sector. For example, the agency has issued 2 90-day temporary waivers from the ELD rule for agriculture-related transportation. FMCSA has worked to ensure that our partners and stakeholders understand the requirements surrounding the use of ELDs. Since 2017, we have conducted more than 550 outreach events regarding ELD requirements nationwide, with more events planned in the future. Mr. Chairman, I would also like to mention the efforts the FMCSA is making to help military members and veterans transition to civilian life. We thank Congress for working with the FMCSA to reduce those administrative barriers. These efforts include options such as allowing states to waive the skills test for military personnel with appropriate experience. Additionally, we are finalizing a rulemaking to establish a training program for qualified providers at the Veterans Administration to become certified in conducting commercial drivers' medical examinations. We are working to implement an under-21 driver pilot program to allow drivers with certain military training to operate commercial motor vehicles in interstate commerce. The FMCSA believes these rulemakings will produce better trained and qualified commercial motor vehicle drivers. And finally, FMCSA is moving toward encouraging innovation, one of Secretary Chow's top priorities, with our work with our partners on automated driving systems. The Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee met recently to discuss highly automated CMVs and will issue recommendations later this year. We are working with NHTSA, Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration as well, to develop comprehensive plans to better manage department initiatives related to automated vehicles. The FMCSA recently released a request for comments about regulations that could be a barrier to the safe testing and deployment of these technologies on public roads. The comment period ended on May 10th, and we are reviewing the information that was received. Engaging the community through outreach activities with industry, safety advocates, driver organizations, and the motoring public is ongoing. Mr. Chairman, the public expects a safe, efficient, and reliable transportation system. With your continued support, FMCSA employees, our partners, and stakeholders will continue sharing this commitment to maintaining safety for all road users. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. We'll now turn to Chairman of the full committee, Bill Schuster, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talked a little bit about the, in the FAST Act, we created a military pilot program, and you mentioned that a little bit. Can you tell me how far along you are? Are we starting to see the effects of it, or is it still in the planning process?
Yes, much of what we do, and again, I'm 3 months on the job just about, involves a lot of data gathering before these programs can be launched. I've been assured that the pilot will be stood up by early next year, and what it would look to do is to provide the opportunity for military personnel between the ages of 18 to 21 with appropriate training to transition very easily into the commercial side. Currently, we are completing an information collection process, and we will need to get Office of Management and Budget approval to collect additional data during the pilot program, because it is a pilot program. We hope to gather additional information from that to see if this could actually be expanded to a larger population.
Right. Well, again, there's a driver shortage out there. As you move forward, any way we can be of help to you with OMB, we certainly want to, because as I said, there is a driver shortage, and that's the next question. What are the things that you may be able to do? What are the things that maybe we need to do to improve that? My understanding was there's 50 to 75,000 shortage of drivers, and that number is going to continue to grow.
Right. And one of the things that I do believe it's worth, I think this pilot program is an excellent first step, because the logic is simple. Look at some of those younger drivers. The difficulty is that if you look at the broader population, younger drivers are involved in a higher percentage of crashes, injuries, and fatalities in the general population. That doesn't necessarily mean that in a segment that, for instance, military personnel who have training, who have discipline, that they might be able to certainly put that type of general data aside. So expanding the population of potential drivers, I think, is one way to look at it. The other thing is to look at what is happening with drivers out there. What is the quality of life that these drivers are? Driving in the commercial sector has always been a very difficult job. And are we making it harder, or are we making it something that people could look forward to and say this is a good career, not just a job on a temporary basis?
Right. Well, I know we had a roundtable a couple months ago and talking about autonomous trucks, and of course the fear for many out there is it's going to displace drivers. Well, folks that I've been talking to, the trucking industry, said you're talking about 40 or 50 years before that happens. And the idea that you can take the toughest, and you tell me if your experience is different than mine, but from what I hear, the toughest drivers to get are those that have to do the long haul, have to leave home for weeks at a time and drive long stretches of road. It's monotonous. And with autonomous vehicles, you can reduce the amount of drivers on those stretches, and then when you pull into a city, Pittsburgh or New York or Los Angeles, when the truck pulls off the road, there's a group of drivers there at some facility that can take it the final mile, the toughest part of the haul, and also they can be home at night or most nights. So is that something that you perceive it the same sort of way?
Well, we are very excited about the prospects of and the possibilities of fully autonomous vehicles and what that would bring. Of course, any change will have some levels of disruption. But from our perspective, we are looking at what would that add to the safety environment. It's all about safety. And we believe that there's some real possibilities there for both improving safety, efficiency, and the economy. That said, I must say that, well, as you said, we might look at 40, 50 years for a fully autonomous vehicle. I'm excited about all the additional safety measures that are being added to trucks on a daily basis because of these developments in technology that are, by the way, ties into the previous question. It's making the job a little bit easier for those drivers because you have this additional technology that's available today, that's being incorporated today, that's helping them on the road and making it safer.
Right. There are lots of technologies going out there, and I just want to make the point. I always try to make this point is that although we've seen I think an uptick a little bit in accidents and fatalities in the trucking industry, but over a long period of time, I think the numbers stay pretty consistent that 75% of the accidents that truck drivers are in are not their, it's not their fault. It's the traveling public that cuts them off or whatever. So again, it's the folks in the industry are doing a good job. They can do better, but I think that and all these new technologies certainly can be to help to make it even safer out there. So thank you very much.
I'll return to the ranking member, Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martinez, you perhaps recall I mentioned in my opening remarks my concern that the agency does not have reliable, easy-to-read system to verify the safety of a motor vehicle. This has been the long, outstanding issue. And the agency is 7 months late in submitting an action plan that Congress required in the FAST Act. Though this was made even more urgent because of recommendations by the National Academy of Sciences, and I mentioned their study as well in my opening statement. When will Congress receive the action plan required by the FAST Act? Remember, the FAST Act, I think, was passed 3 years ago.
Thank you. That's correct. The report, I believe, was due December 17th of last year. You can imagine my disappointment in assuming this position in February and seeing that that had not been submitted. I can tell you that as we speak today, it is in final departmental review, and I hope that that will be forthcoming. But that said, we have been directed.
You hope that it will be forthcoming, Mr. Martinez? It's in final review. If it's in final review, you should be able to tell us when you expect it to be final.
And I don't have a date for when that would be made available. What I will say is that we have not waited for that study to be put forward. We are moving. We have fully accepted the National Academy of Sciences recommendation, and we are moving forward with their recommendations.
So you are now in the process of implementing the recommendations of the National Science Academy of Science? That's
correct. We have accepted those recommendations. We have started with having an initial public meeting to continue to gather input into the corrective action plan. We have contracted with the National Academy of Sciences, in fact, to continue for them to provide guidance to us, because we think that that's something that was sorely needed at the FMCSA to have.
I do appreciate that, because it does seem to me you have the information at hand to proceed, and not waiting in a bureaucratic fashion for that endpoint is important to us. Last year, the agency withdrew a proposed safety fitness determination rule that had been developed by the prior administration. Now, this rule is what I thought all of us are always after. It cut through all of the confusing data, all of the technical stuff, to provide a bright line safety test by assigning a safe and unsafe rating. That's what the public and the industry want and expect the government's truck and bus safety regulator to produce. Are you committed to issuing a final rule? We call it the Safety Fitness Determination Rule, or SFD. And what is the timeline for that rule so that we could all understand what is safe and what is not safe?
Well, I think that would be helpful. This goes back to the old adage of bad data in gives you bad data out and results. And in fact, for an agency like ours, may often result in greater confusion, in misplaced enforcement efforts, and perhaps litigation. I think it's critical at this time to focus on making sure that we are gathering the right data for analysis, and that involves preliminarily speaking with industry representatives, safety advocates, and third parties like the National Academy of Sciences.
Do you operate on the basis of a timeline, Mr. Martinez? I expect they've been doing that all along. So unless you have a timeline, I don't know how we can expect that the public will understand what is safe and what is safe and what is not safe. I'd like to get some understanding from you what at least the timeline is.
And I can't give you a hard date for when something
Mr.
like
Martinez, I can understand that. You know, could I ask that you get to the chairman a timeline? I'm not even asking for a date.
Yes.
I'm asking for a timeline because I think this critical information going to the public is so important. Finally, let me ask you about the fatalities I think all of us on both sides have been discussing. There's been a compelling case made to mandate automatic emergency braking as a way to prevent the increase in these deaths. Now, this technology has been commercialized a long time ago and is mandated in trucks in the EU and I understand will be in every truck by 2022. Now, that is very important that the industry is head of the federal government. Why can't we mandate this automatic emergency braking to indicate to the industry we understand what they're about and they should get to it even more rapidly?
Well, those are areas that, of course, especially with emergency, with the braking systems, that we are evaluating. I will say this, that some of the, as was referenced earlier, some of the great advances that are already occurring in industry, and they are incorporating new technologies across the board that are improving safety regardless of mandates. So that is an area that we would be happy to work with Congress and work with the industry to continue to study to see what would make sense.
Well, I appreciate your answer, but I also appreciate the industry is going ahead and doing it. I think the Congress ought to be very, and I think they're doing it for a reason. Nobody wants to be involved and incur the liability if one of these accidents, in fact, takes place. So I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hunter.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, thanks for being here. First question is, when we did the FAST Act, it established a pilot program for veterans and reserve members younger than 21. If they were driving heavy trucks in the military, they can now drive heavy trucks out, going through stuff. How is that working out?
We are in the final stages, and as I said, the pilot program should be stood up next year. We're in a data gathering mode right now, and we need at least one approval before we can roll that out. We think that's going to be helpful, not just because it will add a new population to the driving population, but also the data that we hope to get that may inform us and Congress about whether that that population could be expanded beyond military.
So I have data. I have data here in front of me. I was well prepared for this hearing. In 2016, 16 to 20-year-old male drivers are actually less likely to be involved in fatal crashes than their 21 to 24-year-old counterparts. Have you found that?
I'm not familiar with that data.
Are you looking at data like that?
Well, we know the general data in the population of general drivers, but I think more specifically we'd want to look at those in that age group that have commercial driver licenses and drive intrastate, and that is not information that I currently have.
So let me ask you, how many states, contiguous states, allow for commercial driver's license between the ages of 18 and 21?
I don't know that off the top of my head,
Well,
but that
I'll
would be
answer.
relevant information.
Let me answer for you, Administrator. The answer is all of them. All 48 contiguous states allow for commercial driver's licenses for trucks after you're 18 and between the ages of 18 and 21. I've got a bill called the Drive Safe Act. There's a companion bill in the Senate, and it allows for a pilot program for people ages 18 to 21 to go drive. That's why I'm asking this. There's pushback on this, but I don't get why, because again, all 48 states allow for an 18-year-old to get a CDL. So you can drive from San Diego to Sacramento, which is about 500 miles, but you can't drive from San Diego to Reno, which is just over 500 miles. So it's the exact same distance, and if you overlay California over New York State, it goes all the way down to North Carolina. So you can drive from San Diego all the way up to Northern California. It'd be like driving from New York City all the way down to North Carolina, but that's illegal because you cross state lines. Can you explain that, how that makes sense just logically in our minds?
No, and I'm actually familiar with that, and I believe that that's something that deserves exploration. As a former motor vehicle commissioner, both in New York and New Jersey, you know, I will say that those who are in that population who have a CDL would be probably safer than the general population. The problem is the general population of those in that age group are disproportionately involved in in crashes, injuries, and fatalities at high rates of speed.
Let me interrupt you again. I've got the stats from 2012 to 2016. For those 4 years and 2016, which is the latest year for NHTSA data, 16 to 20-year-old male drivers are less likely to be involved in fatal crashes than their 21 to 24-year-old counterparts.
I'd be happy to see that data, and frankly, that is, as I stated in my earlier, we can only move with information that is provided to us or that we can be informed by. That is how we make regulations, and that's how we move forward. I think that to cut to your question, which I think is an important one, there is a shortage of drivers. There's a population that would be easily help in that effort. The question is, can we have some kind of a structured environment like the military pilot program where we know we're getting disciplined individuals who have been trained, perhaps go into mentorship programs or something like that, so that it's not the general population that you're dealing with, it is regulated. Now, and I'll say kind of what we did as motor vehicle commissioners around the country, where we adopted graduated driver license programs, where the younger drivers were basically told, you are on a conditional situation and you have to have a certain amount of training, et cetera, before you can drive. So I think it's worth exploring. We are not unalterably opposed in any way to this. It's something we would be eager to work with Congress, the industry, and safety advocates on.
Thank you, Administrator. And I just want to stress one last time again, you can be 18 or 19 or 20 and drive in any state in the country. You simply can't cross the state line. So I'm not sure what putting more rigor, we're all for it, making sure it's safe and more classes. But right now it exists as is. And we have the power in this committee to give people jobs and to make it so you can drive interstate commerce, not just intrastate commerce, and you'll be legal when you cross that 1-foot state border. So thank you very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, I mentioned earlier the issue regarding insurance, and in fact, I mean, obviously this predated you, but it came out of DOT in 2014. Current insurance limits do not adequately cover catastrophic crashes, mainly because of increased medical costs, and the estimate would be that would be about $3 million. What's your experience from New Jersey and/or opinion about looking at a review of this 1980 limit?
Yes, it does seem, just looking at it from the outside, that when you see a date of 1980, that is problematic. We understand the importance of the issue as well. Insurance coverage is about ensuring that in the unlikely event a crash occurs, those involved are all protected. Back to 2014, the FMCSA published an ANPRN, advance notice of proposed rulemaking, with the hopes of collecting information. And what the FMCSA found, unfortunately, and again, this does predate me, was that much of the relevant information that would inform the agency to move forward was proprietary in nature, and we would not have access to it, and it was not being voluntarily provided. We do believe that there's relevant information out there, both in the industry and from the insurance industry, perhaps, but certainly from in the commercial motor vehicle industry. And we would be eager to work with Congress on this should Congress choose to move forward.
So you're saying you can't get the experience data from the industry?
We can't get the
from the insurance industry.
That's correct. Much of it is proprietary, and of course, you always have to look at information that's provided to you with a bit of some judgment as to whether it's skewed or not.
I think there's also, though, I think there is some data on how many crashes there are and how expensive they were, and this could be looked at through a study. But I mean, beyond that, I carry $1 million for my own personal vehicle, for liability, and I question whether that's enough. I mean, for a large, heavy truck, $750,000, common sense says, yeah, they're probably not. I mean, sure, crashes are not that likely, but when they do happen, the severity is such that it's unfortunate, because this is causing a chain of events where now you have someone hires a lawyer because of a fatality or an injury, and the lawyer says, well, it's only $750,000, your medical costs are $3 million. Well, we've got to go after the truck manufacturer, we've got to go after the broker, we've got to go, I mean, we don't have deep pockets here if it isn't a big company and it's an individual driver. So, there's something I think needs to be done here to better protect the public interest.
And Congressman, I agree with you. It deserves some evaluation. We have been I think, have tried this before my time here, and they felt that they just couldn't have, they didn't have the information on hand to move forward with certainty.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that it's not worth exploring.
Okay, well, if you come up with some innovative ideas on how to move forward on some, this issue, I'd love to chat about it. So, and then quickly, just back to detention time, because again, I think this is a root problem for a lot of, there's certainly anecdotal evidence and actual documented evidence about how little many drivers can earn because of their delays, either at ports, and when they're doing piece rate especially, and at delivery points. And I think it's also, the likeliest form of incentive, or shall we say, I don't know if you want it's incentive for someone to violate hours of service because, hey, I had to sit there 3 hours and now I got to get this other load, and if I don't get that load, then I get blacklisted because I, didn't keep. And so, how are we going to move forward on getting, as the DOT Inspector General said, reliable, accurate, representative data on the frequency and severity of driver detention, which prior to you, your agency concurred with, but it doesn't seem to have been any action.
I agree with you on the detention time problem. We have, again, received, in my personal conversations with industry, from the driver level to companies, owner-operators, this is a problem out there, and it does translate into a safety issue. Currently, the FMCSA will be publishing a request for information from the industry, from drivers, technology vendors, and shippers to better understand the scope and the characteristics of the detention time, because that's something that we're going to need. Regrettably, we don't have, FMCSA doesn't have any real authority or jurisdiction over this. However, as I said, it is a safety issue because it's an abuse of the drivers, and it's abuse of those operators if they are indeed held up 5-6 hours, and it becomes a safety issue. I believe, in an odd way, the electronic logging devices, which has been somewhat controversial, may provide some ray of light here, not for FMCSA, but for industry, to gather industry-wide information to see, how widespread is this problem, who is abusing this, and if they were to voluntarily provide that information to FMCSA, we would be happy to review it.
All right, I agree with that. It seems like the ELD is purpose-built for this. I mean, it's an app, essentially, and you just have one category in the app which you hit, which is detention time, and while you're sitting there, and then when it's over, you click off, and then the company, the individual, whatever, would have all reams of data over time. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, for being here. This might have been answered earlier, but I want to just kind of reconfirm it. But I've been working with to form the CSA program because I think it's got a lot of issues about fair representation and fair to our motor carriers. I think, in the FAST Act, we submitted the forms and revisions supposed to be to Congress by January. I think maybe you answered this, that you don't have a timeline, but you hope to have it soon. Is that right?
That on the CSA?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. It was supposed to be, I believe, submitted December of 2017. Coming in February, I obviously asked what was the delay. It is currently under final review. I don't have a specific date that it would be issued, but it's not holding us up in implementing recommendations and moving forward with corrections. We've actually contracted with the National Academy of Sciences to help guide us to
well,
implement these
I'd like to just reinforce with you, since you're new in the position, that the program has just been really unfair, where our drivers are, trucking companies have been getting dinged when it hasn't been their fault, when there's an accident, hurts their insurance rates, hurts their ability to be hired by other shippers. So I think that, that's absolutely necessary. Also, another note, heard from my constituents concerns about the rest period hours of service. I know the ranking member has just asked questions about that, but Has FMCSA given any thought to making changes beyond the arbitrary hour limits? You know, drivers sees congestion. You know, I guess what I'm just saying is more flexibility for the drivers when they know they can't get there because there's a accident on the road and they pull off and they get flexibility. I'm hearing this from my constituents.
Yes, Congressman. Of course, our priority is always safety. So we look at any of these issues through that lens. I believe that a great first step has been these electronic logging devices, because now it makes everybody on a level playing field. And we all know, we have to admit that, you know, paper logs were fudged in the past, and now we can say, okay, it's electronic. We can less susceptible to that, certainly. Now let's look at hours of service and see whether some modifications, that is not extending the hours, but providing some flexibility in the current rules. And I will say that we are happy, we are engaging with our stakeholders in the regulated community on this and safety advocates to say what would be acceptable. And I would also add, because you're going to hear later from the enforcement community, we can't make these rules so complicated, because these are all engagements that occur on the side of the road or in circumstances where it's law enforcement and stakeholder of the regulated community. We have to make sure that they're clear rules. But that provides flexibility.
Yeah, I think flexibility is the key word, so I wanted to get a point across. Speaking of electronic logging devices, has your agency seen any issues where they're not working, and have you been forced to intervene with the manufacturers?
There's a large number of manufacturers and different devices. At present, there's about 370 different devices available. 247 manufacturers. We have seen some reporting of ELDs that do not work. It's been sporadic. We have not had to deregister anyone as yet, but we are willing to do that should a particular provider or device show that they're not.
Okay. Another note, how many regulations has your agency rescinded since Secretary Child's been Secretary?
I don't believe that we have, quote-unquote, rescinded any regulations, although that is something that we are always looking to rescind or update. Of course, rescinding a regulation, to rescind a regulation, you have to go through essentially the regulation process. So it would be somewhat time-consuming, but we're always looking for that, because that's what our stakeholders in the industry would look for the updating of regulations.
And so you're still planning on examining?
We are constantly reviewing our regulations.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Martinez, for being here. Administrator, I have been advocating for years that the Department of Transportation help evaluate and address the problem of undiagnosed obstructive sleep apnea in commercial vehicle operators. As it stands now, we do not even know how widespread this problem is, because there is no concerted effort to study this frequency in highway transportation operators. We are only made aware of the effects of sleep apnea after a high-profile accident. I represent Hoboken, New Jersey, and the last accident that happened with the rail in Hoboken, it was found that sleep apnea was part of the cause. Now, I'm just wondering, we don't even do a study on sleep apnea to see the effects on vehicle operators. Is that something that you'll be willing to look into in the future? Because I know that it was there for a while that was going to be done, and there was some comments to withdraw it. But if we don't study it, we don't even know how impactful it is. And now we're starting to find out that in the commuter rail industry, it is very prevalent, some of these accidents, this sleep apnea causing. I know how debilitating it is, because I suffer from sleep apnea. Mm-hmm. And for me, sometimes it's difficult.
Right. Thank you for that question, because I know that while this the OSA, obstructive sleep apnea, may be controversial, or whether to mandate it or not. The health and well-being of drivers, commercial motor vehicle drivers, is of paramount importance to us. And OSA is a concern. It's one of those factors that is a concern to us, just like, say, diabetes might be. But the current safety programs that we have, as you know, commercial motor vehicle drivers do have to go through health screening. Those providers are registered with us, and we enforce with them that they should continue to rely upon their medical training and expertise to determine whether a driver exhibits the multiple risk factors for OSA, because there are risk factors. And these medical professionals, we believe, should be trained properly to evaluate the individual in front of them to say whether they are a candidate for that. And I think that's where we stand right now.
So you think we have the tools to make any kind of decisions on sleep apnea for operators?
At this point, where we are relying on the medical training of the doctors and medical professionals that currently do the medical evaluations of the drivers to say, is the driver in front of them show the risk factors for OSA? I can't inform that. I can't improve what training those medical professionals do, except to encourage them that this is something that is important to CMV drivers and to the FMCSA, that this is something that they should evaluate.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
The chair notes the presence of our colleague, Congressman Mike Gallagher, and we appreciate your interest in this topic, and welcome to the committee. And with that, I'd ask unanimous consent that Congressman Gallagher be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing. Without objection, that is so ordered, and we'll now move to Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martinez, there's been a lot of discussion not only about ELDs, but the F4A amendment. F4A amendment's called that because in '94, Tip O'Neill actually had this as part of the FAA bill. We also call this the Denham Amendment because we've passed it 5 times now into the Senate. We're getting tired of doing that. But my basic questions are about the safety as it pertains to meal and rest periods. California and Washington, in their wisdom, have tried to create a patchwork. If you have more states that continue down this road, if more states continue to add their own meal and rest periods, first of all, how would the trucking companies be able to adhere to a patchwork across the entire country? And secondly, what does that do to safety across the country if you're forcing drivers to pull over based on a clock versus based on when they're actually tired and these professionals want to take a break?
Well, thank you. And as you know, hours of service is one of the things that we struggle with every day in terms of regulating this community. We have that on a national basis, and that doesn't mean that it's not controversial from time to time, and we're always looking at it. I can't imagine how much more complicated it would be if individual states adopted their own meal and rest break and hours of service, if you will. It would highly complicate the landscape, not just for the regulated community, for the companies and the drivers, but also for the enforcement community. So we certainly deal with this in other areas, which is why we like uniformity. We have uniformity in vehicle maintenance issues, drug and alcohol testing, and health screening of the drivers. Those are national, and I would just be very cautious if we go into that world of having 50 states or more jurisdictions add a patchwork of different rules and regulations.
So with the ELDs, electronic logging devices, now being implemented across the board and capturing drivers' hours, can you not also use the ELDs to show that you're actually taking a break and verifying that you're taking a break, and hopefully doing it when you're tired versus when you're stuck on the Golden Gate Bridge or some other bridge across the country that you happen to have that time come up?
Well, that's correct. As was noted earlier by another member, the ELDs basically are a recording device. We have not changed the hours of service. Basically, it's whatever you would have normally put on your paper log, you now do it on your electronic log, so that is exactly what would happen. You would log that you're taking your break at such and such a time and for such and such a reason if you saw fit.
Do you anticipate other states are going to follow in California and Washington's footsteps?
I've given up predicting these issues. I would just say from a regulatory point of view, and in my conversations with industry, I know that it would be a complicating factor.
But in this case, federal preemption for interstate commerce is necessary for F4A or for this amendment, meal and rest, for safety concerns, having uniformity across the country.
I think from the regulatory perspective, and I believe from the regulated industry, uniformity is always something that would be sought.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. I apologize for being back and forth in more than one committee. Safety continues to be our top priority, not only here in Congress and at home, but also for your administration, Mr. Martinez, and so I'm delighted that you're here today. As you acknowledged in your testimony, the discussion around highly automated commercial motor vehicles is quickly emerging as a prominent issue in the context of safety in our roads. In fact, I think many would agree that it's difficult to keep up with the pace at which the technology itself continues to evolve. The AV technologies represent a unique opportunity to improve safety along our roads, but also present new challenges as we look to regulate the industry and identify the best framework in which to do so. I understand that the Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee met as recently as October of 2017 to discuss the AV commercial vehicles. Can you speak more to the level of coordination between your agency and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Federal Highway Administration, and also the Federal Transit Administration to manage these new initiatives as relates to the AVs? What are the initiatives, and where would you like to see more intra- and inter-agency coordination?
Thank you very much for that question, because obviously it's a very forward-looking and future-looking issue of autonomous vehicles and automated driving systems. And we are working very closely with our sister agencies, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Federal Transit Administration, and Federal Highway Administration on this. Most recently, we issued a request for comments from industry and the public on what do you think of our existing regulations as it relates to possible testing of commercial motor vehicles, automated vehicles, on the roadways. Most of the general public, when they think about highly automated vehicles or fully automated vehicles, think in terms of passenger vehicles. They're not really thinking of that in the commercial space. And yet we know, as you mentioned, this technology is rapidly developing, and there may be very much a lot of interest from the marketplace. So we have to be ready for it. The first thing that we're doing, as I said, is asking for questions from the public. We also will be doing 2 listening sessions this year, and that I expect that committee to issue a report helping to advise me this year as well.
Well, thank you. As you know, I represent Dallas, which is the home of one of the nation's largest motor coach operators in the United States called Greyhound. In your testimony, you speak of the importance of working cooperatively with our industry and safety partners to maintain the safest transportation system possible. In addition to that, I have one of the largest transportation locals in the country because we're a major trade area and a lot of truck traffic. So I'd like if you would speak to more of the coordination with industry partners such as Greyhound and detail some of the examples of where the industry is doing well and other things that need to be improved, because even with the automobile manufacturers I've been in touch with, and they're going to keep up with the market. And so this might hit us faster than we think, and especially my particular area.
Thank you. So specific to, I will address specific to automated vehicles and dealing with those industry partners, but I will say that we have a very good relationship with the associations, of which Greyhound I know is a member. So certainly the American Bus Association, United Motor Coach Association, National Association of Motor Coach Operators, International Motor Coach Group, and then we also deal with some of the groups that are not faith-based organizations that have buses, tour organizers, conference planners, things like that. We have, in my short time in this position, I've met with Greyhound, but also with some of the other major operators. I come from a state in New Jersey where we're on a corridor, that 95 corridor, where buses are up and down there all the time. And I will say this, bus transportation in the United States is safe. I encourage it. And we have a very good working relationship to maintain that level of safety, because it's good for their business as well to say we have a sterling reputation in safety. So we will continue that as this technology moves forward, because as I said earlier, they're incorporating a lot of this automated technology into their vehicles now. We don't necessarily have to wait for the fully autonomous vehicles, and I think that makes the driving a little bit easier for the drivers, and it should make the passengers a little bit more at ease.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martinez, thank you for being here. I understand late last year, the FMCSA's online registry of certified medical examiners was compromised, and it was forced to be shut down for a period of time while the agency investigated the hack. I was made aware of this when a constituent reached out to my office after being unable to access the registry. Can you explain to the committee what exactly happened and provide an update on the status of the online registry? And were there any lessons learned that we can share with other agencies to help prevent other databases from being compromised in the future?
Thank you for that question. This is there was an unauthorized attempt to access the National Registry. As it's described to me, somebody attempted to get in the front door, and they got to, through the screen door, but didn't get into the system itself. So they were not able to access any personally identifiable information, PII. But nevertheless, that was a clear sign for us that we had to be careful. All of these types of systems, whether it's in FMCSA or other federal agencies or in the private sector, unfortunately there's an active community of hackers that are out there, and you don't know exactly what they're going for. But certainly personally identifiable information is something that is a primary target. Currently, we have stood up a kind of a manual workaround. It is not ideal, and I know that it's not ideal because when I went to see my doctor, who actually does this, she complained to me just last week about that it's a little bit cumbersome, and I promised her, as I promised you, we want to get this up and running and fully functional as quickly as possible. It's a great idea. It facilitates doctors participating in this program, but we're not going to stand this up fully until we are assured of the safety. So currently we're working with our state, the department's IT lead and outside vendors to ensure that the next iteration will be safe.
So when you say quickly, you got any estimates in time?
I believe it's a matter of months. It will be short term, but we are making progress every day, and we are getting updates every day from our vendors and from our partners at the department.
I won't ask you to be any more specific, but can you please keep my office apprised of the progress? And I would encourage you to make the months a smaller amount of months rather than a few extra months. Mr. Martinez, one of the more positive safety trends I've seen is the decrease in bus-related fatalities over the past 40 years. In fact, since the mid-1970s, we've more than doubled the number of buses on the road, nearly tripled the number of bus miles traveled each year, and yet decreased the number of bus-related accidents by 30%. And in 2016, we had the second lowest number of bus-related accident fatalities since 1975. What do you attribute this positive trend to?
I believe, as I kind of alluded to in the previous response, a very close working relationship with industry. They know what we're looking for. They're better prepared. Frankly, we, as a regulatory agency and working with our state partners, we really don't want to write violations. We'd prefer that everybody know exactly what's required, and I believe that that has been adopted by the major carriers, certainly the associations. So we do training work with all the associations. We work very closely with the operators around the country, and we take it seriously because obviously it's not just a commercial motor vehicle, but it's a commercial motor vehicle that is transporting people. But I believe it's the combination of education, continued enforcement efforts that's uniform, and I believe improvements to the vehicles themselves, the engineering and the safety improvements to the vehicles over the years.
Well, Mr. Martinez, again, thank you for your time. Thanks for being here, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member for holding this hearing today. And Mr. Martinez, thank you for being here. And the Port of Newark, I'm sure you're familiar with, a key component of the largest seaport on the eastern seaboard is located in my district. Thousands of trucks carry billions of dollars of goods through there every year. Yet, at this critical port, and as across the country, there's a severe shortage of truck drivers. This is in a city with an 8% unemployment rate. And I know if you were previously chief administrator of Motor Vehicle Commission, we still called it DMV.
Yes.
But you're no doubt aware of the state's particular problems in this regard. I know you've been asked this question about truck drivers shortage in the past, but I really appreciate if you would speak about it at this point. And someone who, since you've formerly been head of a state agency that licenses drivers, could you speak to that?
Certainly. And I'm glad that you mentioned, the unique, somewhat unique about in the Port Newark there. I was just visiting one of the major transportation companies that operates out of Elizabeth, major trucking companies, and just last week. And that, as I go around the country, I talk to companies and associations, and we need more drivers. We need more drivers. And part of the way, obviously, it's good for the drivers that are currently in the market because they're getting some incentives to joining. One of the incentives that I believe is that industry is already providing is, hey, we're a safe operator. We will work with you in terms of your schedules, but there is a shortage. And so how do you expand that population? And you put the second piece in there about if we have folks, particularly younger folks who are unemployed, we deserve to look at that. I really do believe that deserves some hard look. Now, we are moving forward with the military driving pilot program, and we hope to get some good information from that will advise us how to move forward. And but obviously, if Congress chooses to go forward, we would like to work with Congress on whatever suggestions you might have.
Okay. And so in terms of that, I mean, I know it's, get into private industry and businesses, but how do we incentivize, opportunities for people to even, approach that as a potential career?
All right. Well, one of the things that I just kind of alluded to is some people think that commercial motor vehicle driving is kind of going to be a dying career. It's not. We're going to have commercial drivers for a very, very, very long time, and we need more of them. And we need to say, even with all this automation that we're talking about, you're not going to have fully autonomous vehicles, next year. Where certainly testing would be occurring, but is make that work somewhat more attractive. The pay is certainly good. I know that some of the major corporations are actually beginning by bringing on those younger drivers for intrastate driving, not interstate driving, and starting on smaller trucks, keeping them in training programs, and encouraging them that this is a career. It's not just a job for the summer. And then they realize that they could spend a lifetime in a very, very good career.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Graves.
Thanks, Dad. I first want to congratulate you. Secondly, I know you have some strong Cajun blood in your organization, and so the expectations for your agency have significantly increased. Y'all maintain the safety management score system score, excuse me, and that's an important tool to help to inform, I think, a lot of folks about the safety and the ability of different drivers to point out areas where are situations when you have drivers that are unsafe. But I do have a concern in terms of how that score is put together. The score, as I understand, is how it's put together right now, would include factors that don't have anything to do with the actual drivers in some cases. You may have infrastructure failure. You may have an at-fault driver that is driving under the influence, that may be going the wrong way down a one-way road, that may actually hit an unattended truck that is parked legally. Yet that will affect the SMS score of a driver. You're right now working on a demonstration program, the crash preventability demonstration program, to help, I think, tease out some of those perhaps crashes or incidences that don't really inform anyone about the true safety of a driver. Can you give us an update on how that's going? And I just want to reiterate the importance of this. I think the SMS score is very important, but if we are sending inaccurate information, or if we're setting an inappropriate baseline or average, then it's sending distorted information and distorted safety information, which could actually be concerning.
Correct. And as I've mentioned before, it's that, what data are we actually using? I think the industry correctly pointed out that, let's look at this and drill down. And I believe that this crash preventability pilot program has actually been informative to the FMCSA. We recognized industry's concern about these quote-unquote not preventable crashes. Over 3,700 crashes of that nature have been submitted so far, most of which were we determined to be not preventable by the motor carrier. And so that's a fairness. And I think that what we have done through this project is to say, let's use two scores here, full transparency. So in evaluating this, we had 1,657 that were deemed not preventable. To your point, something falls from a bridge and hits the truck, or a truck is legally parked and somebody crashes into it. Those are not preventable. And so what we do is we provide an alternate score to the company or the driver to say, well, this is what your score would look like with that included and without. I believe in total, requests for review were submitted were about 1,300 different companies. So we think this is useful. I think it's a good first step to just be fully transparent, and we will continue the conversation with industry.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield my remaining time to Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Mr. Graves. I'd like to put up a slide on there. I don't know if anybody can see that or not, but this actually is a summary of actions taken to give relief or not from the electronic logging device mandate over the past year. Last November, I delivered a letter and a speech. By the way, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record, asking the administration for a 90-day waiver for all sectors of the trucking industry before the mandate went into effect on December the 18th. Unfortunately, the top one, the answer was no for all sectors. Other sectors have had better luck, Mr. Martinez. And by the way, it's good to get to meet you in person since you and I have spoken on the phone several times. Other sectors have had better luck. The Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, doesn't have to worry about ELDs for 5 years. The same with the California private company Rail Delivery Service, as you can see. Other waivers and exemptions have been granted for truck rental companies, package delivery services, cattle and insect haulers, and the list goes on and on. But there are 2 pending exemptions down here that I would like for you to see. Requests that I strongly support, and a number of my colleagues do as well. OOIDA's request for a 5-year ELD waiver for small trucking fleets with excellent safety records. And then the Ag Retailers Association requests to be included with their ag industry counterparts in the 150 aerial mile exemption. Is FMCSA going to give them the same good treatment as they gave Hollywood film studios and grant these exemption requests? And also would add that, is it true that the Motion Picture Association of America, does that include adult films as well?
Well, I don't
include that industry.
Pardon me?
Does it include that industry as well?
I honestly don't know that, but I'd be happy to respond through the chair if that information is actually available to us.
All right, well, if you would respond to that question I just asked you about the 2 pending ones.
Certainly. And all of these requests for waivers or exemptions are evaluated on their own, and there have been a substantial amount of requests for waivers or exemptions to the rule. Many of these are still pending, and it is unfortunate that it is taking time to evaluate them, but they all evaluated on their own merit, and I hope that we will have answers on all of these shortly. The one that you refer to from the Motion Picture Association, and what you find is that the trucking industry is very, very segmented. Many of them have particular issues and concerns. When looking at a request for a waiver or an exemption, it is geared towards, okay, when will you come into compliance? What's the time frame for coming into compliance? So that's one of the threshold questions. And so those who apply for that should come with a reasonable time frame, or join that with, what are you doing now that currently meets or exceeds existing safety standards that would essentially match what is required by an ELD? And so with the motion picture industry, and I'm not that familiar with that waiver, but I will tell you that as I am advised, it's a very unique industry where the drivers work for multiple companies in the course of a day, using multiple vehicles during the course of a day. They do not drive for much of the day. They're actually working on set. In order to meet the requirements that we would usually get from an ELD, they've actually used a third-party evaluator that each day goes through that employee's record and says how many hours they were driving, for whom, and such and such. And with that, also the industry basically said, we are looking to be compliant, and we hope to do so if we can find a vendor that can work with the particularities of our industry. And I guess that argument was found compelling by my predecessor.
Well, all of our sectors of our trucking industry are unique. And Mr. Chairman, could I reclaim my time that I was going to get before it was yielded to me?
No, because we did 2. We went way over.
You did? Okay. All right.
Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you. My question is on the issue of mandatory driver's training, the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, or MAP 21, which was signed into law by President Obama in 2012, required the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to establish minimum training requirements for individuals seeking a commercial driver's license or CDL, including behind-the-wheel training. Safety groups and labor organizations and owner-operators have all expressed support for mandated number of minimum hours of behind-the-wheel training. Is your agency currently working on issuing a rule to mandate enhanced driver's training? And in your opinion, is there a need for mandatory driver's training?
The entry-level driver training rule, as it's called, is an example of what is a labor-intensive, but we think beneficial process that's called negotiated rulemaking. It's included representatives from the trucking industry, bus, insurance industry, state law enforcement, state licensing agencies, and safety advocacy groups to come to some consensus about how we move forward to both incorporate mandatory training, because we all agreed that that would be a good thing in the commercial vehicle space. The minimum number of hours, which I think is the nut of your question, was not included in the final rule. But we do think that it's important that entry-level drivers obtain this mandatory training, and that is scheduled. We are on target for January of 2020, where CDL applicants will have to obtain entry-level driver training from registered training providers who comply with the FMCSA's training standards, and state driver licensing agencies must confirm completion of that required training before they issue or upgrading a license. I think that's a great first step. What we heard back during the discussions was that, and this is a lot from the schools and the companies, they say, look, so you may get some drivers that are really prepared. So it's an arbitrary time frame is not really helpful. Some drivers may require more training, some require very little. And I can tell you as a motor vehicle commissioner, we see that in the testing, that some people come in very well prepared and able to pass the exams very quickly, and in other cases, it takes multiple tries. So I think this is a good first step.
So to be clear, in 2020, will it be goal progress training? So if you meet the objectives you have completed, or will it be the mandatory number of hours in 2020 that will be mandated?
What's mandated would be that you take the entry level training from a registered training provider,
yes,
not a minimum number of hours.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Lamalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things. The first I want to touch on, and first of all, thank you, Mr. Martinez, for appearing today and for your recent help on issues we've been all working on, especially to do with ELDs and rural trucking. Please touch a little more on what was brought up a bit earlier with veterans. I mean, veterans need jobs, and we've got a trucker shortage. And so a couple of my colleagues were talking about the differences in rules. What I'm drilling down to here is FAST Act created a pilot program where those between 18 and 21 can operate interstate, and my colleague, stated really well about how California, you go 500 miles and not cross the state line, and you cross 6 states on the East Coast. So how's things coming, again, for being able to plug those below 21-year-old veterans that may be available for that market, solving veterans jobs and shortage of trucking jobs with the others that might have, a pretty decent amount of experience in that short amount of time, but it may be from the military. How are we doing on implementing that, please?
So again, this was a congressional mandate, and we welcomed it because I think everybody agrees that those coming out of the military should be able to transition to civilian jobs. And this is a great career for those with the appropriate training in the military. So we are currently completing our information collection, and we then will have to present that to the Office of Management and Budget for approval on the the scenario for how we continue to collect data after the program is stood up. I am hoping that this program will be stood up early next year, and that we will immediately begin getting information on that group. So it will be helpful because we'll be able to have military personnel exiting into this new careers, and the government will be able to get data that we can then use to go forward to see whether this could be expanded to others in the population.
Okay, okay. It was in something called the FAST Act, so I hope we can, fast result. Thank you. Shifting to the issue, and again, I thank FMCSA for getting to a relief, and also one of the good things that was contained in the omnibus was some immediate relief and a little longer term for livestock, and how that runs up against the problematic ELD device again for what Mr. Babin was talking about. It just doesn't work so well for rural folks, mom and pop, all that, and so as we're getting down to the ELD mandate, and he already took a shot at the Hollywood movie folks, and I think he even said something about adult films, but won't go there. But they're getting the relief. A couple others are, but I mean, Mr. Martinez, and again, you've been very helpful, but just for the record here, you agree that hauling livestock is a heck of a lot different than hauling a lot of other products, whether, whatever inanimate objects might be on a truckload, right? And the challenges that faces, and weather and heat and all that, right?
Indeed, yes.
Okay, so what we have is really three issues here. The driver, the other drivers on the road, and the animals that you have in the trailer. So as statistics have shown when we've made this argument in recent months, that livestock haulers already have a greater responsibility than a lot of other issues, and so with that, a very strong safety record. So we won't debate that either. I think that's pretty clear. So is whether the current hours of service regulation and the ELD mandate, is that even capable of understanding the flexibility that is needed to properly, safely transport livestock, some of it very long distances this way, where they're raised to where they need to go?
Right. I will say that we are actively engaged in discussions with the agricultural transport sector and specifically livestock haulers. As you know,
but on paper though, is the mandate? I mean, I appreciate the discussions, I do, but yeah. Can when we're getting down to legal terms on words on paper, et cetera, is there flexibility? Is it the capability to even understand what that means that can be flowed out? Is there rulemaking, regulatory making that can flow from that really takes into account the flexibility that's truly needed when you have animals in a trailer, and the need to get from A to B without having to race ahead of what, because you're hearing these stories now, racing ahead of when that ELD slams the door on you, speeding, cutting corners, whatever, because you're going to be in a bad way. Do you really think we have the flexibility to do that?
Well, we obviously, this is an area that in the past, Congress has specifically exempted livestock haulers or certain agricultural haulers from some requirements. In this instance, of course, we have provided, FMCSA has provided a waiver through June 18th. The livestock transporters specifically have been, enforcement on them has been exempted through the remainder of the fiscal year. Right. We continue conversations, but we also have specific guidance that will be forthcoming shortly that will provide some additional flexibility to this industry. And I think that within the current existing regulations, agriculture in general has some exemptions or some rules that they play by, that when we meet with many of these groups, they realize, well, I don't even think ELD applies to me. And so much of what we have to do is continued outreach and education and flexibility because of the unique nature of their sector. Of course, we're all concerned about safety. They have to share the road. They have to be safe. I believe that with continued work together, we can get there.
So we have that commitment from you on getting to a real solution then?
Yes.
Okay, well, I do appreciate it. Again, you've been very, very helpful in listening to me and my colleagues on that leading up today. So I appreciate the breathing room, and October 1 is great, but it's going to be upon us before we know it too. So anyway, thank you very much. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Martinez, thank you for being here and sharing with us your thoughts. You know, I want to follow back up on an amendment that passed in the FAA bill that preempted my state, California's, labor protections for truck drivers that were engaged in interstate commerce. You know, so I come from Washington after serving in the California legislature, and sometimes I feel that we spend more time here talking about California's labor laws than we did actually in California talking about California. But proponents, I heard that, Congressman Lamalfa, proponents of the amendment claim that no intrastate drivers, those transporting a load entirely within California, will be affected by this preemption. That's what they said. But I'm not sure I really believe this. In my district, which I represent the Port of Long Beach, everyday truckers transport goods from our ports to inland distribution centers. That goes on all the time. These trips take place entirely within California, but the cargo is from overseas trade bound for destinations across the country. So my question is, under the FMCSA's definitions, are these drayage trips considered interstate commerce, subject to a federal preemption, or not?
Congressman, it's an interesting question, and I guess following the logic, I would still say that because it's completely intrastate, that it is not subject to that. However, it is a legal question, and it's one that I would have to.
Could you get back to me on that?
Through the chair, I'd be happy to do that. That is really a critical, you know, because those goods are going across state lines ultimately and coming from foreign. I will get back to you through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question I have is that a year ago, Ranking Member DeFazio and I both asked Deputy Administrator Jefferson about reported labor abuses in the drayage industry at the ports of Long Beach and LA. In response to our questions, FMCSA replied that since the coercion rule went into effect in 2016, only one carrier has been fined for a violation of the rules. One violation out of over 600 complaints. Administrator Martinez, can you update the committee on the effects of this rule? Have more investigations been completed or more violations found in the past year?
Yes, and it's an area that needs continued work because as I see, our latest statistics indicate that we have received almost 550 coercion complaints. But as you will imagine, some of them are simply complaints. They don't rise to a level of what would meet the definition of coercion. We have had some, I would say, enforcement actions, but only in the dozens. What we do need is, frankly, is to better advertise the fact that companies and individuals, drivers, can complain to us through our website, which is fmcsa.dot.gov. We look for this type of information, and we look for some cases that are ripe for investigation and enforcement action. But we haven't seen those as yet.
So what you're saying is you've had 550 complaints recently the actual violations out of that were found to be in the dozens, maybe?
It's actually not 950. Huh? I'm sorry, it's 950
So out of 950, 20, 25 or so in the dozens. And how many of those were fined?
I don't know what the nature of the enforcement is. I don't have that information, but I'd be happy to provide it. It could be any number of.
So, because for those of us on the ground, I represent in that area, this seems so incredulous that there are not more bad actors actually found. You know, drivers in California prevailed in hundreds of complaints before the state's labor commission against port trucking companies. So we have hundreds of them in California, and just a handful here at the federal level. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I agree, and I'm interested in this issue, particularly and essentially in this coercion rule, we're trying to protect the integrity of what we all are working for, to keep the drivers and everybody that shares the roadway safe from being forced to do things that are against the law or against regulation. So I couldn't agree more, and we're going to remain focused on this. We hope that drivers and companies will report this, and we will investigate them. We investigate every single one.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and with that, I want to thank you, Mr. Martinez, for being here, and we will recess for a few minutes just to seat the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome our second panel, Mr. Dale Kraft, Chairman Kraft, Transportation, Mr. Mike Van Manen, owner of the East Missouri Commission Company on behalf of the Livestock Marketing Association. Mr. McMahon is currently of mine, and I actually have visited his company. Oh, now I'm realizing I'm reading notes here and not paying attention. I've actually visited the company, and we'll go ahead and go right on down here. Okay, Captain Christopher Turner, President of Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, and Ms. Jennifer Tierney, Board Member for Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways on behalf of the Truck Safety Coalition. Mr. Kraft will be along shortly. So, you know, since your written testimony has been made a part of the record, the committee requests that the limit your summary to 5 minutes. And Mr. Kraft, you're going to be recognized first, if that's all right. So I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Members Norton.
You want to pull that mic closer to you. It bends down, too. There you go.
Ranking Members DeFazio, members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Craft Group and the school bus and motor coach industry I proudly represent, thank you for calling this hearing today. Having just celebrated our 75th anniversary, the Craft Group is a family-owned and operated passenger transportation business established in 1942 by my father, George Craft, Jr. Along with representing the Craft Group today, I'm also representing the views of the National School Transportation Association and the United Motor Coach Association. The FAST Act contains critical policy elements that has begun to correct regulatory overreach that was suffocating investment, growth, and employment in the school bus and motor coach industry, but has done little to improve safety. A few highlights from my written testimony. The halting of the former administration's push to increase minimum financial responsibility limits without evidence of inadequacy or understanding of its impact was of the utmost importance. Absent your action, the moves would have devastated both the private school bus and motor coach industries and the public we serve. Both NSTA and UMA supported provision in H.R. 2120, Buses United for Safety, Regulatory Reform and Enhanced Growth for the 21st Century Act, introduced by Subcommittee Member Representative Scott Perry. That would return the establishment of minimum insurance limits to Congress. CSA reform is another important provision in the FAST Act. We trust FMCSA is incorporating the National Academy of Science recommendations, and we seek more opportunities to contribute to the finished product. We hope any new process will represent an accurate, fair assessment of motor carriers and be an effective tool for identifying those motor carriers in need of intervention. An issue near and dear to my heart relates to how accidents are reported on the federal level, federal records, in which motor carrier contributed nothing to the accident. This happened to my company, and we endured the indignity and the loss of business by the display of erroneous information. I'm pleased to report that as a result of the passage of the FAST Act, that FMCSA finally established a procedure for removing those crashes that were not preventable by the motor carrier, but for which the motor carrier had no fault. The FAST Act also allowed FMCSA discretion to continue displaying inspection information for motor coach operation. FMCSA extended that discretion to all passenger carriers, including school bus operations, in violation of the specifics of the statute. Congress and industry mutually agree that the current CSA program is flawed and not a valid tool for consumers to make a credible safety evaluation of a particular company, which can lead to unfair and flawed perspectives on that particular company. My own company has experienced a loss of business because of the unnecessary decision. UMA and NSTA seek the subcommittee's assistance to correct this injustice and move information on passenger carriers from public view until all CSA reforms have been dictated by the FAST Act are completed. This provision is also included in H.R. 2120. Additionally, we applaud the inclusion of a provision addressing the process of new entrant application. We are pleased to report the process that was previously taken 4 to 6 months, often even longer, has returned considerably to less than 30 days. We hope that this change will result in our industry seeing new life and begin to grow once again. The FAST Act mandates that motor coaches be afforded equal access to toll facilities and high occupancy lanes. We seek support from Congress to instruct the Federal Highway Administration to require all public authorities to set out the rates, terms, and conditions for use of the facilities as they apply to public transit and motor coaches. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Members Norton, the important motor carrier policy enacted in the FAST Act were just in the nick of time. The nation needs and deserves a thriving passenger carrier industry supported by regulations that actually improve safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kraft. Mr. Von Manen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify. We appreciate that perspectives from agriculture were sought regarding the interactions with the FMCSA, which is authorized by the FAST Act. My name is Mike Van Manen. My family and I own and operate the Eastern Missouri Commission Company and the Missouri Valley Commission Company, which are located in Bowling Green and Boonville, Missouri. I am testifying today on behalf of the Livestock Market Association. LMA represents livestock markets across the United States. Livestock markets serve as a hub to gather and sell livestock from farmers and ranchers in a competitive bidding environment. I market these livestock to buyers gathering loads to be shipped to the next part of the production chain. This movement is entirely dependent upon the use of a very limited population of highly skilled drivers who tend to be independent owner-operators. Rigid hours of service requirements do not work well for hauling live animals. We appreciate the recognition of Congress and the agency that livestock hauling is a unique and look forward to continuing to work together to find solutions for this targeted segment of drivers. Livestock market auctions, farmers and ranchers are particularly impacted by transportation laws and regulations. Many animals not born in the center of the country must be trucked many miles to lush grasslands and feed yards in the Midwest and Southern Plains. These cattle must be shipped quickly and safely. Time is everything for the well-being of the animals being transported. The key is safely hauling live animals, especially in times of great heat and humidity. This is to stop as infrequently as possible and to keep the trailer moving to provide proper ventilation. The majority of the livestock hauls can be concluded within the time frame outlined by the hours of service regulation. However, unfortunately, for livestock located in or heading to states outside the center of the country, this is not the case. When a driver runs out of time while hauling live animals, they are given the grim prospect of unloading the livestock or leaving them on the trailer for a 10-hour stretch to suffer from the elements, lack of ventilation, and possible injuries. Simply unloading the animals for 10 consecutive hours to rest is also not a good option. First, there is often no unloading, nowhere to unload them. There are no pen systems available along the major American highways, and owners of the pens seen at feed yards and livestock markets are extremely hesitant to accept livestock in transit due to liability, staffing, and biosecurity concerns. Even if a location is willing to take animals in unloading or reloading those animals has a negative impact on their well-being. In fact, it is more stressful than the effect of transport itself. Our drivers value both motorist and live animal safety. A livestock hauler is forced by nature of their cargo to drive slower and more cautiously than a conventional cargo hauler because the live animals move throughout the trailer and can be severely injured if the driver turns too suddenly, drives too fast, or stops too quickly. Safety is so important to the livestock industry that many livestock haulers have participated in additional specialized training. Due to all of this, livestock haulers boast a fantastic safety record. National studies show that far less than 1% of accidents involved livestock transporters. With this great track record and of safety in mind, American agriculture needs some relief. The current hours of service requirements provide a too rigid one-size-fits-all framework. This, combined with unforgiving nature of electronic log devices, will result in cattle on the coast and in the southeast being severely discounted or even worsely, wholly unprofitable to raise. Not only will farmers see farmers, ranchers, and livestock haulers drop out of business, it will be felt in a very real way by the American consumer trying to put an affordable meal on the table. The hours of service framework needs to be changed with respect to live animal haulers. These individuals need more flexibility in order to safely get their live cargo to its destination. The LMA sincerely appreciates the several members of this subcommittee for their assistance and diligent work towards safe and practical solutions for our nation's livestock haulers. Thank you.
Thank you. Captain Turner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. My name is Chris Turner, and I'm in charge of the Kansas Highway Patrol's Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program and president of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, representing state agencies who enforce commercial motor carrier safety regulations in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. To start, today's topic is particularly timely given that we're midway through the current highway bill, and we want to thank you for your ongoing commitment to improving CMV safety. And I would also like to thank Administrator Martinez, I've had the opportunity to meet with him recently on several occasions, and I've been impressed with his knowledge, willingness to listen, and commitment to FMCSA's mission of saving lives. We look forward to working with him and his team. When considering FAST Act implementation, we recognize a growing trend within the agency, and it's a lack of progress on critical issues. While FMCSA has made headway on several components of the FAST Act, work remains to be done on a number of key requirements, including finalizing a new MixApp grant formula and improvements to the agency's IT and data systems. The issue also affects grants and state programs. Between the appropriation delays and the approval process at DOT, it takes so long for the funds to be dispersed that the states sit idly by, unsure of how much funding they'll receive and when. Meanwhile, regulatory activity at the agency, FMCSA's core responsibility, has come to a near standstill, with a growing backlog of rulemaking and petitions. And for example, in 2016, FMCSA sent a letter to a member of the broadband service industry indicating that wireless and broadband services qualify under the public utility hours of service exception. CVSA petitioned the agency in May of 2017 to update the regulations, making it official. In March of this year, the agency granted the petition, yet we're still waiting for the rulemaking to be initiated, and this is for a simple update to a definition. It's critical to both the enforcement community and the motor carrier safety, or the motor carrier industry, that the federal safety regulations are clear, that they're effective and enforceable. No matter where you stand on the role of government and regulation, we should all be able to agree that maintaining the regulations, keeping them current and clear, is a necessary and important function. Because the agency cannot move forward with rulemaking, they've come to rely heavily on interpretations, personalized letters, electronic communications, enforcement guidance, frequently asked questions, and other means to provide enforcement and industry with the clarity they need when an issue arises. That's with the expectation that the regulations will be updated at some point in the future, and often that update never takes place. I want to be clear that this is not meant as a criticism to the hard-working people at FMCSA. We understand that they face a number of challenges, both internally and externally. New administration means turnover, new leadership, and often a shift in priorities, as well as a pause in the regulatory work as people get up to speed. And also, implementation of the ELD rule for FMCSA has been the agency's top priority, and the agency has been plagued with frivolous challenges and meritless exemption requests. But it isn't a new issue. It's one that's been growing steadily over the years, it's ingrained in the culture of the agency, and it must be addressed. We need to make sure that FMCSA has the necessary resources, technical staff, authority, and time to meet the agency's core responsibility, maintaining the federal motor carrier safety regulations. And we are hopeful that under Administrator Martinez's leadership, we'll begin to see a shift in the culture at FMCSA. And finally, we believe that more can be done to improve the coordination with our North American partners. Commerce does not stop at our borders, and we've long recognized that harmonization between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico benefits industry, enforcement, our economy, and consumers. As the pace of regulation stalls here in the U.S. and our partners continue to move forward, and as a result, the regulations drift further apart. And inconsistencies in the regulations results in inconsistencies in the inspection and enforcement process, creating separate sets of rules for industry to follow. While the regulations in the three countries will never be identical, more can be done to improve the reciprocity and uniformity of CMV safety regulations among the three nations, which will help support the flow of people and goods that fuel our economy. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Tierney, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jennifer Tierney, and I'm a board member for Citizens for Reliable and Safe Highways, as well as one of the millions of Americans whose loved one was killed in a truck crash. I traveled to be here today from North Carolina. My motivation to be testifying before you comes from the loss of my daddy, Jim Mooney, and the goal of preventing families from suffering preventable truck crashes and fatalities and injuries. My dad was in a horrific truck underride crash on a dark back country road when he crashed into the side of a jackknife tractor trailer that was blocking the roadway. Truck crash deaths and injuries have been dramatically rising in recent years. Since 2009, annual truck crash fatalities have increased 28%. In 2016, 4,317 people were killed in truck crashes. And early data for 2017 indicates that truck crash fatalities are up another 10%. During that same time, truck crashes and resulting injuries have also risen 475,000 and 145,000 respectively. My comments today will focus on policies that can improve truck safety and appropriate steps to implementing and enforcing them. The first I'd like to touch on is automatic emergency braking. It's a proven technology that leading trucking companies in other countries have been using for years to reduce the number of the crashes their truck drivers are involved in, and also to mitigate the severity of truck crashes that do occur. In the United States, some motor carriers have been voluntarily using AEB for at least 10 years and have established beyond question its effectiveness and reliability. For example, Snyder National, a major trucking company, experienced a 69% decrease in rear-end crashes and a 95% reduction in rear-end collision claims since it began equipping new tractors in 2012. We urge this subcommittee to consider the benefits requiring this technology can provide. A final rule requiring the use of speed limiting technology set at 65 miles per hour or lower should apply to all trucks. A recent study out of Ontario found that the incidence of heavy trucks speeding in a crash dropped 73% following implementation of the speed limiter mandate. This study directly debunked the claim that speed differentials would lead to an increase in overall crashes involving big rigs, finding no such evidence of an increase. This life-saving technology has also been a standard component in most trucks' engine control modules since the 1990s because so many other countries already mandate their use in commercial motor vehicles. As a result, most trucks would not require a retrofit, but would instead need to have their speed limiters set. We urge this subcommittee to take action to require speed limiter use by all trucks, existing and new. Driver training is one of the most dangerous occupations according to the Department of Labor. Currently, there is no minimum requirement for behind-the-wheel training hours. We urge this subcommittee to require FMCSA to modify the entry-level driver training to include a minimum behind-the-wheel training requirement. Truck underride crashes can be catastrophic. Unfortunately, I know that all too well because the car goes under the trailer, bypassing the crumple zone and airbag deployment safety features. In severe collisions, the passenger compartment intrusion occurs. A requirement for all trucks and trailers to be equipped with energy-absorbing rear and side underride guards to protect car occupants from underride crashes. We are very grateful today to Subcommittee Member Representative Cohen for introducing the Stop Underride Act, and also to Representative DeSaulnier and other representatives on the subcommittee who are co-sponsors. We are also thankful to Senators Gillibrand and Rubio for introducing the Senate version. This life-saving will strengthen rear underride guards, mandate side underride guards, and require proper maintenance of these guards. We urge subcommittee members to join this bipartisan effort. An electronic logging device is a critical safety technological device to ensure compliance of federal hours of service rules. Attempts to delay, weaken, or reverse the effort or to allow exemptions for special industries or special interests to the ELD rule should be swiftly and soundly rejected. During a time when truck safety is in serious decline, increasing truck size and weight or limiting shipper and broker liability would be steps in the wrong direction. The DOT has not offered significant solutions to address the rising number of truck crashes. At the same time, the administration has already withdrawn 2 rulemakings and delayed 4. all of which would have improved safety. Moving forward, I'm hoping that members of the subcommittee will prioritize safety and remember that death and injury figures are not merely statistics, but are people like my dad who were needlessly killed or hurt in a truck crash. I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I'm pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you. I'm going to start questioning now. I'll do 5 minutes, and then we'll go through other members. Each will be given 5 minutes to question. Mr. Kraft, how many years have you been in the motor bus business? 51 years? Okay. I came from a trucking business myself. My grandfather started a trucking business in 1933, and I actually ran that business for 10 years. I loved it for 8. That being said, under the new rules here's a real question that I'm concerned about because of the uniqueness of your situation. Is there adequate differences allowed for the operation of buses and the uniqueness of yours with that's given away with the FMCSAs or for the Federal Motor Safety? Do you think that the like hours of service, as well as the difference between what you do and what a motor carrier would do that's actually operating a truck and hauling freight? Is there enough adequate?
Absolutely. There's a huge difference.
There is a huge difference, and they keep up with that. I mean, the rules are correct as far as you're concerned.
Well, I'm not sure that they're all correct. I would have to look into detail, but first of all, our training programs are much more extensive than our counterpart in the trucking industry. For school bus drivers in the state of Pennsylvania, I don't know whether that's national or not, we provide 40 hours of training, classroom training, and then another 10 hours of in-bus training for them to get their license. Plus all the background checks that are required. There's like 6 or 8 background checks that are required as well.
That's because the children, obviously, but yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Mr. Van Mahan, I want to say it right. In your case, you're dealing with livestock. Right now, we're looking at a possible waiver specifically because once you pick that livestock up, you've got to move from point A to point B. Is it possible to meet the do what's best for the livestock as well as do what's best to make sure your drivers are safe?
I think there needs to be a little bit of flexibility involved in that. You know, there's a lot of hauls that can be done within the time period of hours of service, but there's also some that extend past that. You know, it would be problematic if we didn't have a grace period at the start or at the end or some flexibility of a nap time or something during the haul that, you know, I'd hate to see a truck get shut down within an hour's worth or 100 miles of its destination, and those cattle have to be set on that truck for 10 hours or offloaded when they're that close.
Right, right. Then, and I want to ask also, now, you deal with livestock and livestock only?
That is correct. Mainly cattle.
Okay.
We used to be in the hog buying business and have transported a lot of hogs also.
Is there any variance that you can do under the electronic logging system? Is there variances that allow you to be flexible on going from point A to point B, or the amount of hours in service with the electronic system?
You know, I don't think we would complain about the electronic system. We want to be compliant as long as it is built in to give us the flexibility that we need to transport our product.
So, but it doesn't do that now?
No, it does not. It does not do that now.
And that's a concern that we're having with the fact that...
That is correct. It doesn't have an exempt button or an ag exempt button that can be pushed or it can be, you know, recorded that direction. So, yeah, it does not have that flexibility built in.
And just a quick statement, because I know what's involved with drivers, I believe that our electronic logging, which is good, and I think that we can use it correctly, but without any ability, and excuse the expression, a common horse sense that can be used while driving down the road to make sure, for instance, we're not stopping in an unsafe place, because that can increase the amount of accidents by not being able to get to a rest area or a truck stop, and the dangers that exist for four-wheeled vehicles who don't have an hour requirement to drive underneath the truck quite often is out there as well. So thank you. My time is about expired, so I will turn it over to Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kraft, I believe I just heard you say in answer to the chairman's question that there is school bus training.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
That is, does that include behind-the-wheel training?
That does include behind-the-wheel training.
Well, may I compliment you on that, because that's what we've been trying to get for other kinds of training, particularly truck training. Mr. Kraft, you indicated in your testimony, you spoke of regulatory overreach in the FAST Act. Now, understand the FAST Act was a very bipartisan bill. And you spoke about it having a negative effect on investment, even employment, in the school bus and motor coach industry. And you said it did little to improve public safety, improve safety. But I'd like to cite to you two recent examples that I find very troublesome with private school bus companies that have had what I think most would regard as preventable accidents, and they are very serious accidents. As we speak right this moment, the National Transportation and Safety Board is meeting on recommendations for stemming from 2 school bus accidents operated by private school bus operators. One killed 12 people, and 6 of them were children. In one of them, the investigators found that the school bus driver had a history of serious health issues, and that in the past 5 years had been involved in at least 12 crashes or incidents while operating a school bus or a personal vehicle. Now imagine somebody like that is driving a school bus. In the second accident, now being considered by the National Transportation Safety Bus, the driver had a history of repeated complaints of speeding, aggressive driving, and at least 1 prior school board accident. Now these 2 crashes, as you can see by what might have been taken by the authorities in advance, just didn't need to happen. So I'm going to ask you, we don't know what the NTSB will be recommending, but I want to know if you will support whatever recommendations they may make for ending these kinds of deaths for children on school buses.
You're asking if I would support that, whatever the final...
If they issue a recommendation aimed at preventing future deaths of school children on school buses, would this be a recommendation you could support?
Yes, ma'am, it would.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kraft. I know there are others who want to, my colleague may want to ask questions, so I won't proceed with my next question.
Thank you. Congressman Burletta, you're up.
Thank you. Mr. Kraft, great to see you again, and thanks for being here. It's always enjoy having a fellow Pennsylvanian on the panel. In your testimony, you mentioned FMCSA improperly assigned a fatality to your publicly viewable record. While these records do not indicate fault, but rather account for your involvement, it sounds like this incident had a significant impact on your business. Could you help this committee understand the consequences of that fatality record?
Well, I think there's so few fatalities in the busing industry, being 20 annually with 30-plus years of statistics in the motor coach industry and 5 in the school bus industry annually, again, over a 30 or 35-year period, that any fatality on your record is a bad indication of as you being a poor operator. So when the public that your customers can go into your record and see that you have a fatality on your record, it's a big blemish because there's so few of them in our industry.
Hey, I want to switch gears here and talk about an issue that is very important to me, and that is the safety of our students when they are riding the bus to and from school. I know this is a big priority for craft transportation and the rest of the school bus industry. Earlier this year, I asked Secretary Chow what the Department of Transportation could do to harden infrastructure at our nation's schools to protect students. I think we need to include enhanced security measures for school buses in that equation. I think we're leaving them out. Mr. Kraft, do you agree that school buses need to be included in the conversations that we're having about school safety? And is there anything Congress can do to help you better protect our nation's students?
As someone in this industry that transports over 300,000 students per day, Congressman, that's my greatest fear. If we do everything in the schools similar to our airports to protect the safety of our students in the schools, then the terrorist or whoever that individual might be are going to pick the next soft target, and that would be the school bus. And that is a huge fear of not only me, but everyone in the industry. Probably, if I would have to guess, probably only 20% of our buses are behind gated fences. So how easily would it be for someone to get into a bus overnight and put a bomb underneath the bus or something similar to that? So absolutely, it has to be an extension of the school day when transporting in the school buses.
Yeah, I agree. You know, as we look at trying to keep bad people out of our schools, we can't forget where the kids go once they come out of that school and they get on that bus. And I believe we really need to start having this conversation, including transportation as well as school buses, and making sure these kids, I mean, listen, no parent should ever worry about their child once they leave their home. And you know, we're talking about a lot of stuff around here, but the best way to stop this is to not let it happen in the first place. And I think we need to start expanding our conversation not only to the schools, but also try to think ahead of what the next soft target would be. And I fear that myself, you know, kids sitting on a school bus, so thank you. And I hope Congress will begin to heed the call of the American people and start looking at keeping these kids safe when they're in the school. We do a hell of a good job keeping ourselves safe. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to advise the members, they've called votes, but we're going to try to get through. We've got two other members of the panel. Ms. Payne, if you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is really for anyone. Mr. Kraft, I was involved in school bus transportation prior to me going into public office, and you said you're responsible for 300,000 children on school buses?
That's correct.
Wow. I was going to mention my 10,000, but never mind. But in New Jersey last week, a school bus was hit by a truck, killing one teacher and one student, injuring 43 others. And, you know, I understand school buses are subjected to rigorous safety regulations at both the state and federal levels. But most of these regulations are designed to make school buses safer for travel on local roads, not for interstate highway accidents like last week's. The NTSB has recommended requiring seatbelts on school buses, but as of last week, only 6 states require them. This seems like, you know, an area really ripe for federal involvement. What are your thoughts, sir? And I'd like everyone to weigh in, please.
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to the families involved in the accident last week. It was a very unfortunate circumstance. All the details are not actually available to the public yet, so I can't speak to that. But as an industry, we're not opposed to seatbelts on school buses. However, we do believe that the seatbelt law should be regulated by each individual state, so that where the funding is. The funding for the schools comes from the state, and any seatbelt regulation, we would not, as an industry, want it to be an unfunded mandate. So we think it should be regulated by the state. In addition to that, as an operator of school buses, since it's the safest ground transportation that we know of in this country, we want as many of the students on the buses as possible because it's the safest mode. One of the statistics I read a few years ago, there's like 850 or 60 students killed going to and from school each day by various other means, whether it's bike, walk, their parents' car, their own car, whereas if they're on school buses, there's only 5. Mm-hmm. So we're cognizant of that law is going to create additional expense to the school bus industry, and we want to make sure that that expense doesn't preclude the safety of our buses.
Thank you. Sir?
I am not an expert on transporting students, but I have served on our local school board, and we owned and operated our own buses. And I was aware of the statistic that the safest mode of transportation of students is on the school bus versus any other way of getting them to and from school. So I commend all school bus operators for that.
Thank you for the question. We would first agree that school bus transportation is incredibly safe, as is the bus industry as a whole, and congratulate them for their efforts in safety and transportation of children. We would say that each crash, especially in a school bus where risk is heightened, is tragic, and we would support the safety measures as long as they're reliable and they're proven, as NTSB's recommendations usually are.
Okay, thank you.
The Truck Safety Coalition represents thousands and thousands of victims and survivors of truck crashes all over the country. Mm-hmm. So every life is precious, and nobody knows that more than we do. So we would certainly support seatbelts in buses and any other available technology that would save lives. All lives are precious.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony here today. We really appreciate you coming in and giving your perspective on these issues. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you putting together this panel, and Chairman Graves and all the witnesses who've testified here. In 2014, my constituents who were present, Randy and Laurie Higginbotham, lost their 33-year-old son, Michael, like thousands of others, unfortunately, have, to the harrowing tragedy that is truck underride. Circumstance wherein all the passenger safety mechanisms placed in passenger vehicles are effectively rendered null when striking the rear, side, or front of a semi-truck tractor trailer. Ms. Tierney, I appreciated your testimony, and I know that as you testify that you've lost a family to this particular painful type of tragedy. In 2016, truck crash fatalities totaled 4,317, 28% increase since 2009. That same year, the number of truck crashes totaled 475,000, resulting in 145,000 injuries. Of those injuries, we know some of the most debilitating injuries resulted from truck underride crashes. What can we do to address this problem? Especially, should every member of this Congress support the bill that's just bipartisan in the Senate that's been introduced to mandate the placement of truck underrides? Yes, ma'am.
We absolutely should pass comprehensive underride protection. That would strengthen the rear guard standard that we currently have. It would require a side underride guard, and it would study certainly front underride guards and the maintenance of all those guards. That is life-saving technology, absolutely.
Based on your time advocating for truck underride, do you think there's any chance the industry would voluntarily self-regulate for the safety in this matter?
While some in the industry have, and for them we are very grateful for that, but others have not and probably would not. Therefore, I do believe that a mandate is needed to make sure that the entire industry is doing the safest thing to prevent these catastrophic crashes. My dad was killed when Michael Higginbotham was a baby. So this is a problem that's been going on for decades and decades, so I do believe a mandate is needed.
Well, I found from my sponsorship, the responses I've got from a whole lot of folks in the trucking industry has been negative and harrowing, and that the safety of the potential victim is not of a concern, or certainly something they think that is fiscally within their possibilities. In 2002, a report was issued by Technology and Maintenance Council and the American Trucking Association entitled A Brief Look at the Far Horizon. This is 16 years ago, an exploration of what's to come for trucking. It predicted even anticipated regulations on the front and side underride. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this particular paper.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. As far back as 2002, industry was already predicting regulations to be promulgated on rear side and front underride. In the report, the Trucking Association predicted that underride regulations for straight trucks would come as early as 2005. The report shows that industry even predicted the front and side underride regulation would be issued as early as 2006. What other reason would the trucking industry have had as far back as 2002 to be issuing predictive reports about future regulation on truck underrides, if not for the fact that they knew people were dying and that lawmakers would take notice? Ms. Tierney, what evidence is there that side underrides, front underrides, and stronger rear underride guards can increase the likelihood of preventing passenger compartment intrusion and ultimately fatalities from car and truck collisions?
I saw it, and I saw it with my own eyes. I witnessed the rear underride and side underride crash test at IAHS. It was one of the most profound things I've ever witnessed in my life. Those crash tests were successful in both cases, and they prevented passenger compartment intrusion. They took a crash that most likely would have been deadly or catastrophic and turned it to an injury where a driver would have walked away. So they absolutely do save lives, and this is an issue that's so long needed and so heartbreaking to people that continue to lose their loved ones in this way. My dad died of massive head injuries, and Jane Mansfield was probably the most well-known underride crash in this country.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. And I'll have to admit, I remember when Jane Mansfield died, and that was like, I think it was the 60s. It was that far back, and my staff cautioned me not to mention her name. Since you have, I think I could do it. That means that issue's that far back, over 50 years ago, people have died for that reason, and it should have come to the attention, and safety should have been a concern. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to enter into the record a 2007 report issued by Transportation Research Board of the National Academies entitled The Domain of Truck and Bus Safety Research into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this 2007 report, a study conducted by the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute noted that both front underrides cause particularly fatal results, and the properly undesigned front underrides could reduce fatalities by 27 to 37%. My heart goes out to all the families who have been affected by these tragic collisions: Mary Ann Keith, Lois Durso, Ms. Tierney, and especially Randy and Laurie Higginbotham, whose Michael, son, our constituent, was killed in a truck underride crash in the Memphis area. There are times where we're called upon to simply do the right thing. I hope my colleagues will consider the Stop Underrides Act and help end needless preventable deaths. It is our constitutional duty to keep the American people safe, and taking action to prevent these deaths is the right thing to do. I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And seeing no others seeking recognition, I would like to thank each of the witnesses for their testimony today. I ask unanimous consent that the records of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If no other member has anything to add, this subcommittee stands adjourned.